My brother was the most amazing person, outstanding leader. He loved his family and loved serving this state and our country. He dedicated his life to our country.
For decades, Lindsey Graham has been one of the most recognizable faces in American politics. Yet the biggest mystery surrounding his life has never been about his career or his time in Washington. People have always wanted to know why he never married, and that question has fueled endless rumors, speculation, and headlines for years. Now, after remaining silent through it all, his sister has finally shared a deeply personal perspective that offers a completely different explanation from what many people expected. The closest he came to marriage. Senator Lindsey Graham died on the evening of July 11, 2026, at the age of 71, after a brief and sudden illness.
Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina has died. On the evening of Saturday, July 11th, U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham passed away from a brief and sudden illness.
That a preliminary medical examination later linked to a torn aorta caused by years of hardened arteries. He had returned only hours earlier from Ukraine and still had a scheduled television appearance the next morning. The absence of a wife or children at the hospital doors, and in the first wave of tributes made the old questions about his personal life feel louder than ever. For decades, he had never been seen with a wife, never introduced a partner at official events, and never offered more than light deflection when asked why he stayed single. The silence around that part of his life had always invited curiosity, and after his death, the curiosity became almost insistent. People wanted an explanation that matched the scale of his public role, and the absence of an ordinary personal life felt like a gap that required filling. Yet long before that final explanation arrived, there had been a moment when marriage itself seemed possible. While stationed in Germany as a young Air Force lawyer, Graham experienced what he later called the best time of his life. In his own memoir, he wrote about two serious relationships. During those years as a young military lawyer overseas, he became involved with a fellow officer named Carol. He later spoke of her with clear and uncomplicated affection, describing her as a great lawyer and an even better person. They shared time, conversation, and laughter in the middle of demanding professional schedules. The connection was genuine enough that it stood out in his memory years afterwards, yet the structure of military service eventually pulled them in separate directions. She went on to marry and build a family of her own, while he continued on the path that would take him into elected office. The relationship remains one of the few times he publicly acknowledged a serious romantic attachment. After that, even closer possibility arrived with a woman named Sylvia, a flight attendant he met during the same period of overseas service. The relationship developed with unusual speed and became serious enough that he openly considered proposing marriage. For a stretch of time, the ordinary future of partnership and household seemed within reach. He later described the connection as one that grew intense quickly and forced him to confront the question of whether he was ready to build a life with someone else. In the end, competing responsibilities ended it. She needed to return to her family in Vienna, and he felt the pull of unfinished obligations at home. The decision to let the relationship go appears to have been practical rather than emotional, yet it left a clear mark. He also mentioned an earlier girlfriend named Debbie from his law school years, though he shared fewer details about that connection. These three relationships are the only romantic involvements he ever described in his own words, and they remain the nearest he came to the kind of personal partnership most people expect from a man of his standing. Most of us carry one or two relationships that came close enough to change the direction of a life, and then did not. For him, those near commitments sat against a larger private responsibility that had already claimed the center of his attention years earlier. The death simply reopened the public conversation and made the gap between what people imagined and what he had actually chosen impossible to ignore any longer. The romances, he admitted, were real, And the fact that none of them became permanent still requires explanation. The explanation his sister offered over the years has always been simpler than the theories that grew up around the empty space. The rumors that filled the silence. In a city that notices everything, the absence of a partner created space for speculation that grew more elaborate over the years. Some of the talk stayed light and joking, the kind of running commentary that attaches itself to any high-profile bachelor. Other strands of the conversation turned darker and more insistent. For a long time, certain circles whispered that the lifelong single status pointed to something he preferred to keep hidden. The rumors gained new energy in 2020 when an adult film performer claimed that a prominent Republican senator, known among some adult workers by the nickname Lady G, had hired multiple male escorts. The claim attached itself to Graham in online discussions and by me never fully disappeared. He denied being gay on more than one occasion, sometimes with humor and sometimes with flat statements that he was not available. The denials did little to quiet the speculation. Later unproven claims continued to surface even after his death, adding fresh layers to a conversation that had already lasted decades. What made the rumors especially persistent was the contrast with his public record. He supported traditional positions on marriage and related issues throughout his career, and that contrast became part of the story people told about him. The gap between the private silence and the public stance invited theories of hypocrisy or secrecy. Most of the claims remained unproven, yet the volume of the conversation itself became a kind of fact. People needed an explanation for the empty space in their personal lives, and when none was offered, they created their own. The human mind seems uncomfortable with quiet consistency, especially when that consistency does not fit the expected pattern of marriage and family. Only one person in Lindsey Graham's life knows every hidden part of his story, and the reason she shared was completely different from what everyone had been guessing. The sister who knew the real reason. While the public conversation circled theories and nicknames, the person who had known him longest offered a different account. Darlene Graham Nordone, his younger sister, spoke over the years about the private foundation of his life. She described a brother who stepped into a parental role when both of them were still young, and who treated that responsibility as the central fact of his early adulthood. In her telling, the decision to raise her left little room for the ordinary pursuits of dating and marriage that most people his age were free to follow. In 1976, when Graham was 20 years old and his sister Darlene was only 11, their mother died of Hodgkin lymphoma. Lindsey, later, himself described holding her hand as she asked him to let her go. 15 months later, their father suffered a sudden heart attack. 13-year-old Darlene discovered the body. There was no wealthy relative waiting to step in, and no extended family structure ready to absorb a grieving child. There was only a young man barely out of his teens, and a little sister who now depended entirely on him. Rather than send Darlene to live with distant relatives, Graham made the decision to keep her with him and raise her himself. He returned home from college nearly every weekend, monitored her schooling and friends, and took on the ordinary, exhausting parts of parenting while still completing his own education. Friends from those years said the loss forced him to grow up almost overnight, trading the ordinary concerns of a college student for the responsibilities of a guardian. Darlene has said that he was a young man taking on the care of a young girl and then a teenager while still trying to finish his own education and begin a career. The daily demands of that responsibility simply occupied the space where a personal romantic life might otherwise have grown. She never presented the choice as a burden he resented. Instead, she described it as a commitment he made early and kept without complaint for the rest of his life. In her view, the reason he never married was not mystery or secrecy, but the practical and emotional reality of putting her first when no one else was left to do so. The consistency of her account across different interviews and years gives it a quiet authority that the louder public theories never quite matched. She was not offering speculation. She was describing a lived arrangement that shaped both of their lives, even after she grew up married and had children of her own. The foundational decision remained the explanation she returned to whenever the question of his bachelorhood arose. The public rarely has access to that kind of context, and so it invents its own. In this case, the sister who lived the reality was the only one who could close the gap between the rumors and the truth. The career did not erase the earlier choice. It grew from the same root. The visibility that made the absence louder. Once Graham reached the Senate, the scale of his work made the absence of a personal partnership more noticeable to outsiders. He developed a reputation as a consistent voice on defense and foreign policy, making repeated trips to regions of conflict and arguing for sustained American engagement, even when the political cost was high. He worked across party lines on difficult issues, including a major bipartisan immigration effort in 2013 that ultimately failed to become law. He formed a close and lasting working friendship with John McCain, and the two men, along with Joe Lieberman, became known for their willingness to cooperate on national security matters even when it created tension inside their own party. The friendship itself became part of his public identity and offered a form of companionship that was professional rather than domestic. Later, his political alignment shifted in a way that surprised many observers. After years of sharp public criticism of Donald Trump during the 2016 campaign, he gradually became one of the former president's most reliable Republican allies in the Senate. He chaired the Judiciary Committee during a period of intense and highly visible confirmation battles, and later led the Budget Committee. Each of these positions required long hours, sustained focus, and a willingness to remain in the center of partisan conflict. The same capacity for endurance that had once sustained the private work of raising a younger sibling now sustained the public work of high-stakes legislation and political negotiation. The career itself became part of the reason the questions about his personal life never faded. A person who lives so fully in the public eye creates an expectation of a matching private life that includes the ordinary markers of marriage and family. When those markers remain absent, the gap invites explanation. The more visible his professional commitments became, the more the silence around his personal ones stood out. In that way, the very success of the career that grew from an early sense of duty also intensified the public curiosity about why that duty had never expanded to include a conventional family of his own. The visibility amplified the space rather than filling it. The mystery surrounding his marriage remains, but in the days that followed the loss of Lindsey Graham, the practical question of who would occupy his seat moved quickly from private discussion to public decision. Darlene finally steps into the Senate. Under South Carolina law, the governor holds the authority to appoint a temporary replacement to serve until the next elected senator is seated. On July 13th, Governor Henry McMaster announced that he had chosen Darlene Graham Nordone, the late senator's only sibling, to fill the vacancy. The appointment made her the first woman ever to represent South Carolina in the United States Senate. McMaster described the selection as both a legal duty and a personal honor. He noted that Lindsey had taken care of his younger sister many years earlier, and that it now felt right to ask her to finish the work he had left unfinished. President Trump had publicly endorsed the choice the same day, and South Carolina's other senator, Tim Scott, stood with her during the announcement in Columbia. Senate Majority Leader John Thune confirmed that she would be sworn in the following afternoon. Darlene Graham Nordone accepted the role with a brief and composed public statement. She said that Lindsey had always been there for her and that she would now be there for him. She called the opportunity a privilege and promised to work hard in the remaining months to support the president and continue the efforts her brother had pursued. On July 14th, she entered the Senate chamber escorted by Senator Tim Scott and Senator Katie Britt of Alabama. She took the oath of office administered by Senator Chuck Grassley, then serving as president pro tempore. The ceremony itself was short, yet the symbolism was clear. The woman who had once been raised by her older brother now occupied the desk and the responsibilities he had held since 2003. She will serve until January 3, 2027, when the winner of the November general election takes office. Because Graham had already secured the Republican nomination for a fifth term, the state scheduled a special primary for August 11th to choose a new nominee for the November ballot. Filing for that primary opened shortly after the appointment. The speed of the transition reflected both the requirements of the law and a desire to honor the private bond that had shaped the siblings' relationship for more than 5 decades. In the space of 3 days, a deeply personal history became a matter of public continuity through the simple act of placing his sister in the office he had left behind. The record and the estate he left behind. The professional legacy Graham left stretches across more than 3 decades of elected service and includes both specific legislative efforts and institutional roles that influenced the direction of the Senate. He began in the South Carolina House of Representatives in 1992, then moved to the United States House in 1995. During his time in the House, he gained national attention as one of the managers who presented the impeachment case against President Bill Clinton. In 2002, he won the Senate seat previously held by Strom Thurmond and went on to win re-election in 2008, 2014, and 2020. In the Senate, he became known as a consistent advocate for a strong national defense and an active American role in the world. He traveled repeatedly to Iraq, Afghanistan, and later Ukraine, and emerged as one of the most vocal congressional supporters of continued military and financial assistance to Kyiv. He also maintained long-standing support for Israel and for the NATO alliance. Early in his Senate years, he formed a close working friendship with John McCain and Joe Lieberman. The 3 men traveled together often and became known as the Three Amigos for their willingness to cooperate across party lines on national security questions. Graham chaired the Senate Judiciary Committee from 2019 to 2021 during a period of intense judicial confirmation activity. He later served as ranking member of the same committee and of the Budget Committee, before becoming chairman of the Budget Committee in 2025, a position he held until the end of his service. His legislative record includes repeated attempts at comprehensive immigration reform, most notably as a member of the bipartisan Gang of Eight in 2013. Although that bill passed the Senate, it did not become law. He also played a visible role in the confirmation of numerous federal judges and Supreme Court justices. His political identity shifted noticeably over time. In 2016, he was among the sharpest Republican critics of Donald Trump. In the years that followed, he became one of Trump's most reliable allies in the Senate, a change that surprised many observers yet proved lasting. The combination of institutional influence, foreign policy focus, and late career alignment with Trump forms a substantial part of the public record he left behind. On the question of personal wealth, the picture is notably modest for a figure who spent more than 2 decades at the center of national power. Estimates of his net worth at the time of his death range between $1.5 million and $2 million, with some assessments placing the figure near $3 million. The majority of his assets consisted of ordinary investment accounts, mutual funds, and 2 residential properties, including a townhouse near the Capitol. His income came primarily from his Senate salary, military retirement benefits, limited book royalties, and standard investment returns. Financial disclosures filed throughout his career showed no signs of significant private enrichment or unusual financial activity. In a chamber where some members accumulate far larger fortunes, Graham's financial profile remained consistent with a life spent almost entirely in public service and earlier military legal work. What he left behind, therefore, includes a lengthy legislative and institutional record, a set of personal and political relationships that crossed party lines, and a relatively modest personal estate. The most immediate and visible continuation of his presence, however, was the decision to place his sister in the seat he had occupied. That choice turned a private history of mutual responsibility into a public act of continuity and gave the final chapter of his career a distinctly personal close. What do you think about the choice Lindsey made about his marriage and the way the public filled the silence with its own stories? Share your thoughts in the comments.